All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to explore some pretty amazing stories about faith.
Definitely.
We're going deep into some excerpts that you sent us
Right.
from looks like a pretty dynamic speaker talking about Jesus's teachings.
Yeah, that's right.
It seems like it's probably from a video transcript. We've got stuff like leave your comments below and subscribe to the channel.
Right.
But honestly, the format, it doesn't really matter. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
the message is what we're after.
Yeah, the message is powerful. And one of the things that struck me right away is how the source kind of jumps right into this really vivid metaphor of the mustard seed.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Tiny seed, but like huge potential.
Oh,
right?
right,
Like,
right, yeah.
it's like that saying, big things have small beginnings.
Mhm.
But here's the thing. It's not just about size. It's about the kind of faith.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Break that down for me a little, because honestly, sometimes I picture that mountain-moving faith,
Right.
like almost like some kind of superpower. And you know what? I don't feel like I'm at that level.
And I think that's where the analogy gets really interesting, because it's not about having this overwhelming, unshakable belief right from the get-go, day one. It's more about the genuineness, like the authenticity of your trust, even if it feels really small at first or fragile even, just like a tiny seed that's starting to kind of sprout,
Okay, so it's less about the volume of faith and more about the quality, like focusing on having that authentic connection, even if it feels super small compared to, like the challenges we face.
Exactly, exactly. And the source actually makes this point, that it's that kind of authentic faith, even if it's small, that has the power to actually move mountains. Instead of picturing like this grand, instantaneous kind of shift, maybe we think about it like that tiny seed pushing through like rock-hard soil.
Ah.
It's a process.
Yeah.
It's this persistent force that eventually overcomes the obstacle.
That makes a lot more sense. It can totally relate to that picture in my head. So what's something you're facing that feels like a mountain right now?
Oh, good question.
Because, like, maybe this story is a reminder that you already have that seed of faith inside of you to overcome it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the source then kind of shifts gears and starts talking about prayer, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's not like prayer is just this, cosmic vending machine. You put your request in and boom,
Yeah.
you get instant results.
I'll admit, like, I fall into that trap sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
Where it's like, okay, I asked for this, where is it?
Yeah, right.
But this source is really challenging me to kind of rethink prayer.
Yeah.
Because it talks about prayer being more like a sincere conversation with a close friend.
Isn't that a better way to think about it?
Yeah.
Because when you think about like having a conversation with a close friend, you're not just rattling off a list, right?
Right.
It's not just about the wish list.
Right.
You're sharing hopes, fears, dreams, even doubts,
Right.
And you're not expecting them to solve all your problems right away.
Right.
It's more about the connection,
Exactly.
the trust, and the ongoing support.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
So let's get practical. Have you ever felt like your prayers were hitting the ceiling, like they just weren't going anywhere?
Oh, for sure.
The source kind of reminds us it's not about like instant gratification. It's about nurturing this connection with God. It's like you're tending a garden.
Yeah. It's an ongoing relationship.
So what would change in your life if you approached prayer with that kind of like consistent care and attention,
I think for me, it would mean shifting my focus from what I want to, like what the relationship needs.
Oh, that's good.
Instead of just kind of barraging God with my requests, maybe I should be asking him, like, what do you want me to know right now?
Yeah, I love that shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And speaking of shifting perspectives, the source dives into all these different stories.
Right.
And this is where things get really interesting.
We can really see these kind of abstract ideas of faith playing out in people's lives.
In real life, yeah.
So the first one that really stood out to me was the centurion's faith.
Yeah. Yeah, what a powerful story.
What struck you about that story?
Well, first you got to remember, this guy is a Roman official.
Right.
Like, he's in charge.
Yeah.
Not exactly the kind of person you would expect to be super humble.
Right, right.
Before a Jewish teacher, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But he goes to Jesus asking for healing for his servant. And what's really interesting is that he doesn't demand proof. He's not looking for some big spectacle.
He's just like, I know you can do this.
Yeah.
Just say the word and it's done. Talk about confidence.
Amazing. Right.
It's a real challenge for me because I know I get stuck in overthinking a lot.
Yeah, we can all relate to that.
But the centurion, he just goes for it. What if we dared to act with that kind of boldness? trusting that like the details will work themselves out. What's a risk you've been hesitant to take that might require that kind of leap of faith?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah.
It's almost like the centurion just recognizes this higher authority and doesn't feel the need to control every single detail.
Right.
Makes me wonder, where in my life am I clinging to control when I should be like stepping back and trusting?
Oh, I love that. So the next story, the woman with the issue of blood, it also shows this really bold trust.
Yeah.
But in a totally different way. We got to remember this woman was considered ritually unclean, like according to the laws of the time.
Right.
Basically, her condition, it made her an outcast, someone to be avoided.
Totally.
Imagine the courage it took for her to even approach Jesus, knowing that, that stigma she was carrying.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible.
But her faith was so strong, like she just believed that by touching his cloak, she would be healed.
Yeah.
She was right. But it's not just physical healing that's happening here. It's like a restoration of her dignity. Jesus calls her daughter, acknowledging her worth, her value, even when society had basically rejected her. So what situation in your life seems impossible? What would it look like to approach Jesus with that same kind of trust, believing that even a simple touch of faith, it can bring about like this miraculous transformation?
That is such a powerful reminder that God's grace, it extends to everybody, no matter what their past is, their mistakes, their social standing. He sees our hearts. He sees our longing for healing, and he responds with compassion and love.
It's interesting. Both the centurion and that woman with the issue of blood, they were dealing with totally different problems.
Right.
But their stories have this like common thread of bold, like almost audacious faith, It makes me wonder, is there something about like desperation that fuels that kind of radical trust?
That's a good question. It's almost like when we hit rock bottom, when we've like exhausted all our own resources and our own options. That's when we're finally like open to something bigger.
Yeah.
Something beyond ourselves, beyond our understanding.
That's like the only way up is to surrender, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of surrender, the source then talks about this Canaanite woman.
Oh, yeah.
This story kind of pushes some buttons because initially Jesus, he seems to like reject her request to heal her daughter.
Yeah, it's one of those passages that makes you really stop and think, wait a minute.
Right.
Especially because, we think of Jesus as so compassionate, right?
Right.
But I think there's a deeper lesson here about persistence, about not giving up on your faith,
Yeah.
even when you face setbacks or even like rejection.
It's almost like she's saying, okay, you might not get my culture or my background, but you do understand a mother's love.
Right.
And that's enough for me to keep, knocking on your door until you see my heart.
Exactly. And her persistence, her like unwavering faith, it's what moves Jesus. He doesn't just grant her request. He actually commends her for her faith.
Right.
He says, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. It's like this reminder that, sometimes our prayers aren't answered like right away.
Right.
But God sees our hearts. He sees our struggles. And he honors our like continued pursuit of his grace.
I love that. It makes me think of that saying, prayer doesn't always change things, but it always changes us. We learn patience, we refine our desires, we deepen our trust in God's timing,
Absolutely, yeah.
And speaking of things that refine us, the next story in the source is a real gut punch.
Oh, yeah.
It's that story of the sinful woman who washes Jesus' feet with her tears and then anoints them with that expensive perfume.
Oh, it's such a powerful scene, like really emotional. You can almost feel the weight of her past, her shame, her regret just pouring out her,
And the judgment from the people around them
Oh,
is so real, They're like, who does this woman think she is? Doesn't she know her place? But Jesus, he doesn't even flinch. He sees her heart. He sees her genuine repentance.
right.
And he offers her forgiveness and acceptance.
And not just forgiveness, but it's like an acknowledgement of her extravagant love. She's pouring out her most valuable possession, something she could have easily sold.
Yeah, right.
But she chooses to offer it to Jesus as like this tangible expression of her gratitude, her devotion.
it makes me wonder, what are we holding back from God? What are those things, those possessions, those habits that we're clinging to even when they're hindering our relationship with him? What would it look like if we poured out our hearts to him with that same level of abandon, that same willingness to surrender, everything to his grace?
Oh, that's a powerful question to think about.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in those externals, the rituals, the outward appearances of faith. But this story, it reminds us that true faith, it's an outpouring of the heart. It's a surrender of ourselves to God's transforming love.
Okay, so we've seen faith that moves mountains, faith that breaks down barriers, faith that persists even in the face of rejection, faith that pours out this extravagant love and repentance. And then the source shifts gears and starts talking about storms.
Yeah, it's interesting how that image of a storm, it's such a powerful metaphor for all the challenges that we face in life.
Yeah.
That feeling of being overwhelmed, out of control, just tossed around.
Yeah, and the source doesn't just mention storms in passing. It dives deep into these stories where Jesus encounters these storms, both literal and metaphorical.
Right.
And that first one that comes to mind is that classic story of Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee.
Oh, yeah.
The disciples are freaking out. The boat's about to capsize, and Jesus is taking a nap.
I used to think that story was just about Jesus's power over nature. But the more I think about it, the more I realize it's about something way deeper. It's about his presence, in the middle of all our storms. Even when it seems like he's absent, even when we don't feel his intervention right away, he's there.
Yeah.
He's that source of peace in the middle of all the chaos.
That is so reassuring. It's okay, I might not see you, I might not feel you, but I know you're here, and that's enough. It's this reminder that we don't have to face our storms alone. We have a Savior who's always with us.
Absolutely.
He's that source of strength, of comfort, no matter how, rough things get.
And it's interesting that even after witnessing this miracle, the disciples still struggle with fear later on.
Right.
The source talks about Peter trying to walk on water. He starts out strong, full of faith, but then he takes his eyes off Jesus, and boom, he starts to sink.
It's such a human moment, though.
Oh, yeah?
It's we get a glimpse of what's possible. We taste God's power, but then doubt creeps in and we lose our footing.
We all do it.
But what's so encouraging is that Jesus, he doesn't abandon Peter.
Right.
He reaches out, pulls him up, reminds him to focus on,
and not on the chaos around him.
It's such a powerful metaphor for our own lives.
Yeah.
The moment we take our eyes off Jesus, the moment we let fear and doubt take over, we start to sink,
Yeah.
But as long as we keep our focus on him, on his promises, on his love, we can walk through anything.
And the source highlights that these stories, they're not just about physical storms.
Right.
They're about the storms that are within us, the anxieties, the fears, the doubts that can just overwhelm us.
It makes me think of that verse, "Be still and know that I am God."
Oh, yeah.
It's this invitation to surrender our anxieties to him.
Right.
To find peace in his presence,
Even when everything's falling apart around us.
Yeah, it's a practice, though, right?
Yeah.
It's training our minds to focus on God's goodness, his faithfulness, his love.
Right.
Even when our circumstances are telling us the opposite. It's not about denying the reality of the storm.
Yeah.
It's about choosing to anchor our hearts in something way bigger, something unshakable. And the source reminds us that even when we mess up, even when we lose our footing, Jesus is there to pull us up.
Yeah.
There's that other story about a storm where the disciples are freaking out again.
Right.
And Jesus says to them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?"
Oof, that's a tough one.
It's kind of a tough love moment, but it's also a challenge to remember what we've already seen of God's power, of his love,
It's he's saying, I've already shown you what I can do. Why are you still letting fear control you?
It's our faith needs a little,
A little kick in the pants.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of a wake-up call,
Huh.
the source then jumps to one of the most mind-blowing stories in the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
The resurrection of Lazarus.
Right, that'll get your attention.
This isn't just calming a storm. This is bringing a guy back to life who's been dead for 4 days.
Yeah, it pushes the boundaries, doesn't it? How do you wrap your head around that kind of power?
Right.
But it reminds us that with God, nothing is impossible. There's no such thing as a dead end.
Yeah.
Or a hopeless situation.
Right.
There are no limits to his ability to restore and to redeem.
It makes me think, what seems dead or buried in your life? What dreams have you given up on? What relationships feel like they're beyond repair? This story is like screaming at us that restoration is always possible with God.
Right.
It might not look like we expect. It might not fit our timeline, but it's possible.
And it really challenges how we think about time, too. We're so stuck in this linear thinking,
Right.
deadlines, expiration dates.
Right.
But with God, it's not about, like, how long something's been dead. It's about his power to bring new life into any situation.
It's like he's saying, don't write anything off just yet. I'm still working behind the scenes. You might be surprised what he can bring back to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's some serious hope right there. But not everyone's ready to just, like, jump on the resurrection train so easily, right?
Oh, yeah.
The source talks about doubting Thomas.
Right.
And let's be honest, we've all been Thomas at some point.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He wanted to see the proof, to touch the wounds before he could really believe, and honestly, I get it.
Yeah.
We want evidence. We want something we can see and touch before we buy into something so radical.
But Jesus' words to Thomas are so challenging.
Yeah.
Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. It's like he's saying, it's good that you've seen the proof, but there's a deeper level of faith.
Right.
A faith that doesn't need to see, a faith that trusts in the unseen.
And isn't that the kind of faith we need right now?
Yeah.
In this world with all this information coming at us, all these different narratives, so much that's out of our control.
Right.
It's so easy to get lost in all the doubt and uncertainty.
Totally.
But this story reminds us that we got to cultivate that deeper kind of faith, the kind that anchors us in something beyond just our senses.
It makes me think about all the things we do accept as true, even though we can't see the proof.
Right.
We believe in love.
Yeah.
We believe in gravity. We believe in, like, the internet, even though we can't fully see or understand how it all works.
Right.
So why is it so hard for us to believe in the power of God, even when we can't see him working in our lives?
I think part of it is that we want to be in control,
Yeah.
We want to understand. We want to have all the answers.
Yeah.
But faith is all about letting go of control.
Right.
It's about surrendering to something bigger, trusting that God's still working even when we don't see the evidence.
So we've talked about faith that moves mountains, faith that heals, faith that persists, faith that repents, faith that calms storms. And it all sounds, pretty epic.
Right.
But then the source ends on this surprisingly, simple note. It talks about grass.
It's such a cool twist, right?
Yeah.
After all those incredible stories, we get this image of Jesus just pointing to something as basic as grass and saying, look at how God takes care of even the smallest, most ordinary things.
Yeah.
If he cares that much about something as temporary as grass, how much more does he care about you?
It's like, take a breath, let go of all that worry, trust that God's already taking care of you.
Yeah.
Even the tiniest details. Live in the moment knowing that you're held in his hand,
Absolutely. And it challenges us to see God's presence everywhere, not just in the big miracles.
Right.
He's in the everyday stuff too. The breeze, the sunshine, the sound of kids laughing.
I love that. So what worry can you surrender to God today?
That's a good one.
How can you practice just being present, trusting that he's already got your future covered? It's been an amazing deep dive today.
It really has.
We've gone from tiny seeds to raging storms, from extravagant love to just ordinary grass. And you know what? All these stories, they remind us that faith isn't just something you believe, it's how you live.
It's about trusting what you can't see, embracing the mystery, surrendering to a love that's way bigger than we can even understand. It's about finding hope when things are dark, finding strength when things are tough, finding peace that goes beyond anything we can explain.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep believing, and keep trusting the one who holds it all together.